I just think would be a valuable thing in the future, just to have something that would be able to learn from you. And it's kind of having another, I would say, tester in your pocket, but sort of like another thing to be able to like leverage as you go along.
Hit it.
Welcome to the Test Talks podcast, the place to go to geek out on software testing. And now your host, whose mission is to help you succeed with test automation, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of Test Talks. In this episode, we're going to be test talking with Evan Wiley, a quality engineer for a very large financial company, all about how to get that automation culture into your sprint teams. So listen up and discover a whole bunch of real-world experience around enterprise-wide automation testing in action. You don't want to miss it? Check it out. Test Talks is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs, the cloud-based automated testing platform that eliminates the need to maintain your own Selenium grid and test infrastructure. Try it for free today. Visit testtalks.com and click on the Sign Up Now link under the homepage sponsor section. Hey, Evan. Welcome to Test Talks.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show. I know I heard from you from Moshe from Aptly Tools. He was really excited about what you were doing at your current job. So I'd like to talk to you about test automation, AI, and anything else that may come up. But before we get into it, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I pretty much started, Capital One back in 2013 in called the TDP programs, the Technology Development Program, and just started kind of doing manual testing. And then we kind of had our agile journey and started to do ATDD and everything else within Capital One. And that kind of got me in the path of learning some like Ruby Cucumber, doing that within sprints, and then moving into different frameworks within different teams. And then eventually now we just use Protractor Cucumber for some of our testing, and just doing some like exploratory work around different side of CI/CD implementations we have, and just trying to revamp some things. That's kind of been my journey. Is going from the manual testing to automation to learning different frameworks to kind of learning what, like, teaching other people about it, and kind of having other people outside of quality engineers just teaching other people how to do test automation. And that kind of part of my journey was being the only quality engineer on team. Sometimes it's teaching other people how to do it, so it's kind of easier to spread the workload, and sort of being able to teach people that is valuable, because then you can kind of learn from them. They learn from you, and it makes it more like of a cross-functional team.
Awesome. So I love that you're teaching folks. That's one of the things I see as a roadblock to implementing automation, is the knowledge, even if they're developers. So any tips on how to teach someone automation, or how to get that automation culture into your sprint teams? Yeah,
I did it sort of as like workshops. So I first started with sort of like when I was located in Richmond, sort of taught people workshops about what are some of the best practices of when you first start. I think when you are talking to different like web developers or whomever, you want to put it in terms that they understand. So if it's a UI developer, they would understand some of the concepts around, okay, this is our DOM HTML page, and this is sort of like the layout of how you would go about looking at it. And when you say different types of tags on the page, like this is an H1 tag, you kind of like go through a flow that they understand. And then you tell them how automation fits within that picture. So kind of saying, well, if we have this story coming up on, say, like, I guess make a payment or something that's related to like a story that you're doing, you could explain to them in terms that they'll understand of like basically how the workflow goes, and then how does automation capture all those business processes in order to best produce the desired outcome that we're looking for. So I would explain it in terms of like everyone on the team would know acceptance criteria. So I'd first start from the aspect of acceptance criteria, and then I would kind of explain the workflow of whatever framework we're using, and then tie that back into how is this ATDD, how is this how are we driving testing forward with having the gherkin first, and then structuring our tests around that. And I would, in terms of our framework, I would say, okay, our gherkin is the top layer acceptance criteria. Given I'm this person, when I do this, then this will happen. So you could explain it in terms of the business actions first, and you would say, okay, we have methods and different step definitions that tie this all in together to say, okay, we have this gherkin that's tied to this action. And I just say all these sub layers are just actions that your browser is taking in the background while you are running these tests. And then once you explain in that, you would then go through in these workshops and go through sample tests that you could create with them. Just create like a small exercise to have them understand how the how automation works, and to have them write their own automation tests. And then they would understand how that workflow works for themselves. Because I think you can kind of explain it, and then you have to let people do it themselves. Because I learned by doing. So if you have other people that are willing to just do it themselves, and that'll make it a lot better use of the team's time, and you'll be able to see more throughput with the quality of the repos too. Because from what I've seen is when I've worked with developers and I've gone through these workshops with them, they've actually shown me some things that I didn't know before. Like, we refactored something, make it more cohesive. They come from a different mindset. You always have the prototypical sort of QA hat and dev hat. And then when you switch those, I think it makes it an even more interesting picture of how does this play into your automation or the technicalities of how your framework is built, because they would understand better how the actual your site is built, and the tester would understand how do we make this better. So if you combine the two, it kind of makes for a more cohesive framework. So at least from my own experience, it's been beneficial to have that. So, and then they kind of grow and appreciate the understanding of what a QA person does.
Cool. So Evan, you did mention that you did learn from them as well. So is there anything you remember of what was refactored that you thought, now I know that that's a better way of doing what I was trying to do?
Yeah. So a simple example would be, say, we incorporated Applitools into our automation testing. So when I was actually going through different, our web application, I would say, okay, I visualized blank page for this length and width. So when I created that gherkin, I didn't realize that I could just plug in the length and width with the actual page, and then just make that reusable across. So there's just simple things like that made it a lot easier for me to be able to just plug and play with it. We have RSA also built into our framework. So getting the RSA token when you were going through our test automation flow and doing these API calls to RSA was a little complex. So having a developer there that understood RSA, and he was actually able to implement that within the automation framework, because it was something that, unless it was the developer, it wouldn't have the same context behind how is the RSA plugged in, how is this RSA token plugged into our API calls. So there's just some wins we had along the way to say, okay, this was something that they had implemented with API calls, and then also just some refactoring. Oh, and also we implemented a configuration, when you run your browsers in the automation framework, to have multiple browsers all combined into one configuration file, and just have all have it in parallel, but also run in different browsers at the same time. That was a win as well, because I prototypically thought of configuration files as just running Chrome, running Firefox, running IE, but you can actually combine different browsers and with multiple threads into one configuration file. So that was just something that I had learned along the way from them. And that really benefited my understanding of looking at it from a different perspective of saying, okay, well, if you take someone into a new skill set, then they'll probably have a fresh understanding of that base of knowledge and possibly reimagine what you're thinking about in terms of the actual framework and how it's implemented. So those are just a couple off the top of my head, just this one that I was thinking about.
Very cool. So you didn't mention AppleTools. So what kind of visual validation are you doing?
Good question. We basically had we had our web application without going into specifics, but just going into there's different browser windows and different layouts. So when we were actually testing, there was a story where we had a responsive story. So it's basically different length and width. So when we went into it with tablets, say if we had someone with a Chrome browser running on their MacBook, we actually wanted to test that if it was responsive, that we would redirect them to our mobile app. So there was a separate team to do the mobile app, and we were doing the web app. So when we had the Chrome open and then navigated to the URL in a full page, it would just show the home page we had, the login and everything, and then it would show the dashboard afterwards. So when we actually resized the page, I believe, to a certain length and width, we'd said, please use the IntelliX web browser. Please use the desktop specific sizes. And we said that mobile and tablet is supported by the app that we're supporting. That was kind of things what we did to refactor some of the tests we were doing. So that way, if they went to that browser size, that they would be redirected to that. So basically my AppleTools test would go through that whole page, and I found some defects through it because when I implemented AppleTools within our own mobile web application, actually one of the stories, the responsive story that we had, I realized that at this certain pixel length and width, that it was not showing responsive, that the actual design we wanted for redirecting to an actual web browser. So it wasn't showing the design that the UI designers had wanted for us to display on that length and width in the mobile browser. So I decided to report that defect because it was a defect. It also found this other defect where I was in the middle of transitioning to a new team. So I decided before I left to do just some hardening, regression, and everything. And then when I was running Internet Explorer, I believe in AppleTools, the regression failed. I went back to check on it. And it was actually not even displaying the web page in Internet Explorer. So it was just these different defects I found through AppleTools that was just very interesting. And it's just another good tool to have in the bag because, you never know when you'll need to use it. And I find that, the best UI defects are the ones I found through that because it was something that just can continuously test for. And sometimes it's hard to just eyeball certain things and say, okay, does this match what my wireframes are and everything? And due to all my efforts with that, a lot of our company has adopted AppleTools as a visual automation tool, and we have a Slack channel to support it. So it's actually been really useful, for people, I believe, going forward, just because it's something that was just helpful for me, and I believe that it'll be helpful for more teams going forward.
Cool. So speaking of tools, who chooses your tech stack? And is it a shared framework they use across the organization, or is it just team by team depending on what they want?
Yeah, the tech stack, it's a good question. I would say it's more of it depends on what it is. So I think that, based upon line of business and different needs for different teams, it can vary. I know that a lot of influence comes from kind of a tech lead side. So it really just depends on your own organization and how you kind of structure different projects around different aspects. So at least with our team, I know typically I've seen it balance around kind of architecture requirements and how do we want to design this and how does the best design go around each basically stack. So I know a lot of things we use are Postgres and different things. So a lot of our stack uses the mean stack and just this different things that I haven't been in those conversations, but I know that a lot of that drives from kind of architecture requirements, what's existing within Capital One. Because sometimes when new applications are built or new things, business requirements form, we say, okay, what's existing? Like, oh, we're connected to TSYS or we're connected to this. And we could say, okay, how do we hook into existing applications and then just being able to support that within our own organization. So that was kind of just thinking of probably the best architecture would be one that would support what we have as an existing application and everything.
Cool. So usually before I interview someone, I kind of mini stalk them. So I went to your LinkedIn profile, and it looks like you do a lot of different things. You're always experimenting. Like if you look at the list of things you've done, it's very diverse. So one thing that popped out was Alexa skills. So I think audio is actually going to be a big thing that folks are going to have to deal with in the future with, these type of devices, Google Home and Alexa. So have you done any sort of testing with audio? And if so, how did you do it?
So I haven't necessarily done any testing with it. It was sort of like one of those innovation sprints where we had a lot of some bandwidth. So we had a high five application where we were kind of congratulating people for the work they were doing. And it was different, like things people could put in comments to say, oh, thank you, so-and-so for helping with, this test data that I needed for this sprint or this dependency, or just complimenting people in general, like, about like, oh, you've been a great product owner, so-and-so, thank you for all you do. So this high five application allowed us to look at integrating Alexa with these stand-ups. So like when people were giving their stand-up after their stand-up, we'd say, Alexa, give me the high fives for today. And it would say, okay, these were the people that were congratulated today. And it would read out the different high fives that those people had for a certain day. Yeah, so we had different like skill sets built around that. But first, it was more the interesting part is that we had a lot of issues running into sort of, I wouldn't say security, but like I would say probably more or less like being able to implement a more secure way of doing the Lambda, because a lot of Lambda calls are not within like are not secured within VPNs. So a lot of like, say if you were to create a Lambda now, someone, if it's public, so someone from Russia could like use that same Lambda call and use it for something else. So it's like one of those learnings where we had built something and then realized that, oh well, we can't really use it right now because of security issues. But I think that it's been a good experiment for us, and I know a lot of other public applications that Capital One have used Alexa for different things, and different public applications that actually are using it. I've learned that we do have like our own integrated voice recognition like testing where, I was just sitting in on we have kind of like an automation guild or internally. So we were just learning okay, we have this framework and this, I think it's called a framework called IVR, and it uses kind of pre-records everything and does different, you can set different permutations with it with a pre-recorded voice and just say, okay, this is one flow, and it'll test these different flows and then see if there's like defects within the voice activation flow for that particular user.
So Evan, we finally get to the topic I think you wanted to talk about, which was innovation with AI test automation. Why do you think, what are your thoughts around AI automation and innovation around that?
I feel like there's a lot of room, a lot of different things that I've been reading, and I know you've posted some things. I was going to try to explore some things within my own team and see what is there anything we can hook into to have that running as part of our own things that we do within our own group. Part of it is I think that there's more room to grow with having like sort of a learning pattern of it, being able to teach like an AI about your application as you go along, and then having it learn different actions based upon that. So I was just thinking about it in terms of the perspective that maybe, it would be something in the future where you would just say, okay, well, have it on record at this moment, and I've given it this actions and it's learned this thing, and then I press stop, and then after it's learned that, it'll see other things on the page, and then being able to like experiment with that and run its own tests, edge cases around what you've given it. I just think would be a valuable thing in the future, just to have something that would be able to learn from you, and it's kind of having another, let's say, tester in your pocket, but sort of like another thing to be able to like leverage as you go along, because you could possibly always have it running in the background in your production environment, just to say, okay, maybe in a sandbox production environment, just to say, okay, it's there, and it's constantly validating for me, so like if something breaks, then it'll just like think about it, and sort of not necessarily a test spot, but like something that's kind of like that you don't have that you can feel a bit better that something else is there as well. Say if you're, and it's learned everything from your app during your application life cycle. So it's kind of like even if some resources on your team leave or anything like that, you'd still have, or maybe it's like for this one app is not supported anymore. So you could but you could always have the test bot running in there to say, okay, this is okay, and we like for our existing users, it's still working the way we want to. It's just, and it's learned through the inputs of the other testers that of like how to continuously test for you. It's almost like a way for you to continuously test without actually having to test it.
Cool. So once you actually implement something, I'd love to get you back on the show to talk about it, because I think it is. Yeah.
I've just been learning about it, but like I definitely was starting to dig into it and bake it in as part of our innovation for like different PIs, and just on my own learning, just to like learn it on my own.
So do you think it's the real deal based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, well, so I haven't like, I need to invest more time just to like be able to completely know the scope of what's there and what exists. But like I've just been doing my own like cursory research about it, and it seems like there's a lot of data out there that points to that it's possible. But like I feel like I think there's still some like evolution that needs to happen there for it to be fully usable yet. But I think that there's definitely different parts to it that could be replicated and things like that. But I think just from like the different languages and things that I've seen with AI so far, I don't see it as like yet as something that can be done. But I definitely like, just like I say, if you keep learning about it, who knows what will come out of it. Sometimes it'll be good, and sometimes, even if you like have some few mistakes along the way, you can like learn from that and grow from that. So I think that there's a lot of different opportunities there. I would say, even if it's not what I'm expecting, maybe it'll turn out to be a different way. So I think just if I keep learning and keep taking different courses, I was planning to take a Udacity course, just to kind of get my feet wet with learning it. So I was at first trying to learn some front end development, so I could understand kind of the development cycle a bit better. So like the part of it was I think just continuously learning that part of the subject matter. But just from my own like research, I think that there's definitely possibilities on the way. But I think if you keep like learning it as you go along, then it'll like, once it kind of seems like it's a possibility at some point, then it'll just be a lot easier to see how that would work with certain use cases and so forth.
Are there any conferences or resources you recommend for folks that want to learn more about test automation?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like the SauceCon has been good, and I know that you support a lot of kind of different conferences that are good for that as well. So I think there's a lot of good resources out there. There's the online test conferences that are good as a great learning source for different material coming up. I think there's CA was a good one. I think it's called California. I have to look up the name, but that was one where it was like kind of like a virtual conference, and you could go to different booths and hear people talk about different subject matters and topics. So I definitely feel like there's a lot of good resources out there for it.
Kevin, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give someone to improve their test automation efforts? And let us know the best way to find or contact you.
Yeah, for sure. So the best resource, I've actually been building up my own website for learning about, just to impute my own knowledge about what I know about quality engineering and then try to teach that to other people. So that's coming soon. So don't have a site on that yet, but I've just, and also it's been helpful for me just to have my own knowledge of, develop my own site, just to have that awareness of how it works. That, and I think definitely your site, Joe, has a lot of information on that. I know Dave Hefner was a great source as well. He's actually been on, like, I get his emails periodically for for the test automation. So that was in his guidebook for Selenium's pretty good. And I know Jeff Morgan, he actually came to teach Capital One when we were doing our ATDD change. He actually taught us some more of Cucumber Ruby, and he has his own book as well. So I can provide you with that information after the call, just to kind of say, okay, this is kind of the resources I use. But those, I say those three were kind of the resources I went to. And then of course there's like Google community groups. There's a Protractor group if you're in Protractor. And I would say just like there's different like resources at your own work. Like we have our own Slack channels for Protractor. We have our own Slack channels for like Apple Tools. We have our own Slack channels for our automation guild. So I think there's definitely like, resources online, and definitely like resources within your own group or company, or just like in general, if you like look at Stack Overflow. so there's different, that's probably like the ones that I go to in terms of like learning and educational is probably really good as well.
Awesome. And Evan, the best way to contact you, do you have a Twitter handle?
Yeah. So it's called Test Excellence. And that's also, I have a Facebook, just Evan Wiley.
Thank you, Evan, for your automation awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testtalks.com/221. And while you're there, make sure to click on the sign up for a free trial link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. So that's it for this episode of Test Talks. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Talks podcast. Head on over to www.testtalks.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and other automation awesomeness.